Okay, hello everybody, and welcome for this conversation with the artist Emanuel Rossetti. Emanuel, a dear friend of us living in Basel. In Basel, you also did the project space New Jersey. That's a little bit how we got to know you. And you exhibited since then extensively in the Kunsthalle Bern. You had a solo show at the Power Station in Dallas, where we will show pictures, at the Modern Institute, Glasgow, of course, the Gallery Karma International in Zurich, and so on. And the context of this conversation is that we are collaboratively working on a studio at the ETH and an exhibition in collaboration with Armature Global and Luigi, who is joining the conversation. So maybe before we start with questions on CGI and on your work, I would now give the word to Luigi, or also Niels, if you like, to present shortly the context of this conversation.
Okay, so maybe I start. So thank you, Emanuel, for being with us. The main aim of the discussion is to understand the work of and the practice of art making in the context of what are the general rules and the general standard of the art market. As the studio we are sort of leading with Freddy and Niels is a sort of in-depth investigation on the role of exhibition design as an autonomous critical technology. And the studio is aimed at basically the sourcing of intelligence for the systematization of CGI, so computer-generated images, as a basic understanding on what are the changes in the making of images, in what are the shift in basically creative, industrial, and social process, starting from singular authorship, so this is the case of artist work, towards collective work, as in the case of CGI images and technologies, mainly designed by offices with technicians and non-authorship as the main viable subject of operation. And we would truly love basically to enter in a conversation with you regarding your work. And I think that the main point of analysis or of discussion would be how you can position yourself as an artist regarding the development of new and distributed technologies related to CGI images. And moreover, how do you see the use of CGI devices, plugins, or visualization as an active tool in basically shaping the art market biography or art galleries behavior of your work? So I leave a word to Niels, if he might maybe want to introduce a deeper understanding of the show.
I think that's already a great entry. I mean, it was a question, I guess. So maybe if Emanuel already wants to react to Luigi, your kind of first raised point. I think it's a great start also that we now see an art fair booth kind of at the beginning of the slideshow.
Yeah, hello, everybody. Thank you for this invitation. Yeah, that was a very long question. I'll try to start a bit from the beginning. I think in like around 2007, I started studying photography at the Zurich University of the Arts. And at the time I was practicing a sort of documentary photography, I'd say with a strong interest in, I guess, architecture photography and some landscape. And well, pretty soon it led me to these kind of quite minimalist works, where I think you showed some pictures before. 2008, I made a series of pictures taken with a flash of these stones that were placed all over Switzerland in public space. Yeah, it was quite a sort of simple setup. I would use a medium format film camera, and with a big mounted flash, and I would photograph them in the evening. Now, interestingly, they sort of have different sizes in actual sizes, but I would always photograph them sort of in the same. I mean, the depiction is they're always sort of similar looking, and through that there were a lot of coincidences and things that were happening with the lights, sometimes stronger, sometimes less, or things like stuff that is laying around on the floor would appear in different sizes. Yeah, but there was this kind of fake comparability between those images. And yeah, so talking about the CGI, the first CGI works I made were sort of pretty much in the same time. And yeah, well, one might ask, like, why did I, switch back and forth between this sort of, analog photography that has quite a long history, and then these sort of somewhat ugly and quite crude looking renderings. And I was just thinking about it again this morning, and well, I think one point why this was so easy was because at the time, from what I remember, most students at the academy were actually photographing on film. There were very few digital cameras, which I think also has to do with they were very expensive at the time still. And so yeah, one would photograph on film. However, most people would then edit and color correct and all of that their images digitally. So you would develop the film, and then you would scan it, and then most of the work was done digitally. So yeah, there was sort of a weird thing there, because then you would print them again out, and it would again be sort of analog. So there was always this kind of back and forth between these different spaces, like yeah, and so somehow I noticed that there was this plugin in Photoshop where you could position these virtual objects inside the file open in Photoshop, and you could place this virtual camera. And then I was like, oh, I could just move the entire process of taking pictures into the software and make these sort of virtual photographs. And then I've talked about this before, that I was interested in the rendering as a sort of completely staged photograph. It's all happening inside this virtual space, but all the parameters are coming from analog photography. I mean, the choice of a lens, I mean, it's a virtual lens, but you choose a certain depth of the lens, certain focus, lighting, all these things that were sort of very similar to what I was doing before, but entirely happening in that program. So it was, yeah, kind of moving towards something more minimalist, I'd say, yeah, because sort of a more of a wholeness. Yeah, so that's sort of.
Sorry,
yeah?
so the torus, this was really your kind of first step where you render something. You started with the torus shape, and
yes.
Did you decide for this donut-like shape because it really kind of is the easiest object you can rotate, you can play with texture, light, as the most banal model object, or how did you decide for this shape?
Well, I can't really remember what the options were, but there were a series of objects that were already, you know, pre-existing as templates in these softwares, and I picked this one because it had sort of the I don't know, the perfect properties of what I would want from something like this. It had a sort of quite high complexity, but it only has one surface, so there's no like edges. It's a complex form with one surface. And then of course I was also interested in this sort of you know, more the metaphorical aspects of it, that it has this big hole in the center, so it's sort of it also alludes to kind of an absence, and but it manifests through the material around that hole. So yeah, if that answers a question. But also, I mean, one thing was that, you know, of course, the texture. So yeah, I was talking about what was going on at the art school. There were a lot of other students were started to work with scanners or photocopiers and things like that, and there was a lot of interest in like flatness or like yes, just images as surface. So I used these scans of stones because there were sort of these perfectly flat images, marble textures, and was wrapping them around this shape.
So I have so please accept my apologies for the basically unanswerable long question.
Yeah.
Sorry. So, but I looking at your work, I was thinking of something that might be stupid. So I was wondering that I don't know if rendering technologies, even though maybe photo editing softwares are a way for you to, in a way, work within the pattern of what adaptation is. So if you look at your basically sort of material photography that you took with a certain set of basically restraints over basically different mass of sand, and we look at the basically donut, we see that what I mainly interested is that CGI softwares have a sort of nature of dealing with serialized images. And I wonder if these allowed you a certain set of freedom, if these sort of, you know, made you think about any gap that lies between the physicality of basically photographic techniques and the possible unending results of CGI technologies that allowed you also as an artist to produce more work. Because I'm always wondering that there is a sort of effort, exploitation in the making of an art piece. And sometimes if you look at still at photography, a photographer can make a predetermined set of images with a certain set of budget determined to a certain brief. And you can sell actually those prints as art items, within a certain number of copies. And I wonder what changed when you started working with CGI. So did the main interest lie in the possibility of completely dismantling any restraints you had in life? Or were you in a certain sort of way interested with the possibility of producing a lot of iterations of your work, both as a possibility to have more material to sell, more artist production, or as a way to basically diminish the impact of a single work or a single photo? Another very long question.
Yeah. This is a great question. I don't know if I can give a straight answer, because yes, obviously in the photographic interest, I mean, my interests were really the Düsseldorf school and especially the industrial photos of Becho. I mean, that was what I was looking at as a student, and obviously seriality was the interest. And so yes, this kind of image production through the CGI for me was an extension of that. I mean, it was without the constraints, as you say. However, I mean, also in our conversations we had via email leading up to this talk, I realized there is a lot of sort of ideas about this kind of infinite repetition or infinite possibilities. And I can't really, as I said, I can't really give a straight answer to that, because interestingly, for example, of these donut works, they're quite finite. I mean, I made maybe 20, something like 25 images or something. And I was pretty soon, I came to a close, and I thought that's enough. So for me, personally, the cutoff happened quite fast, and I didn't feel like making more of them or printing them ad infinitum or something. And I have a lot more negatives of analog negatives of these stone pictures, for example, than I have renderings of these torus-shaped marble-covered donuts. So yes, I mean, there is this inherent possibility, but somehow it led me quite to the opposite almost. And that became actually more extreme after, in the last 10 years. I made very, very few renderings. I mean, I haven't made any in 2-3 years now, but they become more and more sort of rare. Or not rare, like sparse.
In this image that we are seeing, Rossetti.
It's connected to this image that we are seeing, because in my impression of your kind of production, you use CGI in a similar way of how you draft or plan your exhibitions, kind of to come up with scenarios. That there seems to be like some sort of interest in the score, or like how in music you would have the writing of music kind of as a starting point, to create a scenario in which then things can happen. So for example, in CGI, in the donut works, you use this simple rule of the Photoshop plugin of the donut to kind of test this, to do almost like a stress test, people could call it, to feed in different stones, different backgrounds to see the coming out of it. And your exhibitions, I mean, these are like to look at them as individual works, but your exhibitions are often also scenarios that you draft here. Like, for example, here, the dripping event, where you kind of plan collaboratively, the water is on top and then it will come down, but you will not have full control of what will happen. And this kind of connects then with you working with Google SketchUp and kind of making the planning of the exhibition, like the plan already your work. Like, can you relate to this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, these things happen sometimes at the same time, but also this sort of happened much later. And of course, you know, I would have to mention some things that happened in the meantime. I mean, besides studying photography, I sort of slowly started working as a curator while I was working with friends on different projects, and mainly it was, as you mentioned in the beginning, the Space New Jersey in Basel, which was an artist-run gallery. And so, you know, there was a lot of planning with other artists of exhibitions, and yeah, so a lot of questions of display, and so we had to come up with a lot of solutions, and yeah, it was around this time that a lot of artists started using SketchUp, and it was like an easy way to plan things and you know, build systems of display. And yeah, I was quite interested in that, but personally I was interested in collapsing that kind of work of that is sort of a design work into a praxis. And yeah, so, and at the same time, of course, the collaboration with other artists happening through this kind of collective run space led to you know, a lot of discussions and ideas, and ultimately to collaborative projects where there were a lot of things happening between different authorships, different bodies of work of different artists. And there was, for example, then this exhibition that we now see a drawing of, which was in Dallas at the exhibition space called Power Station in 2013. Yeah, it was an example of that. It was a exhibition between Stefan Cherpnin, Tobias Madison, and myself. And yeah.
And Emanuel, I can remember, I think maybe a bit earlier, you worked on, I think, several kind of iterations of multiplex. I think
yes,
showed it as films, but also as prints. And I remember, I think, like the buildings you designed in Google SketchUp, they were museum spaces, right? Do I remember
yes.
correctly?
Well, yeah, that's what I tried to mention before. I mean, there was, for a moment, I was interested in making these drawings somewhat public, but also making them, you know, without an exhibition in mind. It was just like a drawing praxis, you know. When yeah, of what I was just trying to talk about, of this way of like designing exhibitions in collaboration with other artists.
I think it will be great to look at with the students at ETH, because one part of our course of the Wahlfach is that we collectively design a kind of Schaulager space in the empty parking garage of the architecture building in the campus. So we really have to show them then multiplex.
So, Emanuel, I have a question. So the aim of the studio, but also of the exhibition, is to, yes, make an exhibition on basically to understand what are the impact of technology on authorship, and this technology being particularly CGI, but also on our side is the understanding on how rendering technologies and the possibility of using 3D CAD/CAM, basically design software, have had in a way an impact on artist work. And what strikes me every time is the fact that the only way to understand the work of an artist is the visibility of their basically finalized piece, their finalized installation, their finalized presentation. And I always wonder what are the basically basic condition also in terms of representation of their studies for a work, and how basically these softwares, in my opinion, had an impact on transferring the work of almost all the artists that use them in also sort of exhibition making discipline. So a lot of artists will not only make the simulation of the way their preferred piece will be systematized in the inner organization of a gallery, a booth, or a museum, but through the constant shaping of the rooms that contain their work, this particular set of very basic architectural intelligence has sort of entered into their practice. So in a way, it is not only about showing, is, in my opinion, rendering had an impact also on the integration of basic architectural formats into the way artists think of their piece. But I also wonder how, in your practice, as you already explained, this had an impact on basically getting away from standard solutions.
Mm-hmm. Well, if we the images you just showed of my exhibition in 2014 at the Kunsthalle in Bern, I think one important part for me was, I mean, I constructed this exhibition, I remember very well, on paper, and it was like a list of situations, and I think that's sort of the most important part, is that it wasn't a singular installation, but it was a composition, so which is different from the image work I was making and I'm still making now, which is usually one situation and there is no composition. This was an exhibition consisting out of different elements, which I call situations. And so there actually wasn't that much drawing involved. It was mostly thinking of the works and then trying to find a way of building them into the space. And there, I think the CGI actually did become important, because I was directly working with the architectural details of the space. But the fact that it all happens digitally in the planning, I guess provoked a sort of blurring of certain boundaries between what was architecturally there and what I was adding to it. So yeah, the intervention and the given features of that space. Yeah. So there, I think there is a kind of blurring, which I think is something you maybe were trying to talk about.
Yeah, that's something I meant when talking about the scenario, kind of that you create an exhibition not in a way that you do like one work after the other, like a sculpture, creating a sculpture, and then in the end kind of presenting the row of donuts or like a row of sculptures as like as products that you did in the studio, but more almost comparable to kind of a game designer create a world in which then things can happen where you don't have full control of what's going on, like in an exhibition. And this was just a kind of a surprising way how to reply as an artist to this question to create an exhibition. Could you like even like compare this practice to the one of a CGI game designer, for example?
Well, I mean, maybe the thing is, I don't know much about game design. I don't know how game designers work. But yeah, I mean, obviously there is a sort of interest in games, but also something I just learned about recently. I mean, what's interesting in at least in English, we have this distinction between play and game. So of course, play is something that we all like to do, and there is a lot of freedom in play, but we sort of often gravitate towards the game, or most of the time. So the game having clear rules. So out of the play, we develop rules, and so the play becomes game-like until it sort of stagnates, and we get bored by it. So we go back to a sort of more playful situation. And this sort of movement, I think, is quite important in the decision-making process of an exhibition. Yeah, if that answered that question. I mean, yeah.